What up, folks? My name is Ronald Wimberly, and I'm a cartoonist. You may know me from such projects as Lab, which I also did with Beehive. Well, this time I'm here to bring you Gratnin, short for Gratuitous Ninja. It's a ninja story about ninjas living in New York City, in Brooklyn, and their failed attempts at direct action. Gratnin takes place in a New York City where the ninja followed the Dutch for vengeance, the Shimabara Rebellion. All right, now 200 years later, one of the most foremost ninja clans has removed itself from history and they're pacifists. Our story follows a group of youth who join this ninja clan and decide they actually want to interact with their society, with their neighborhood, to try to right some of the wrongs that are going on in it. There's Mo, a weed-selling Nokizaru, hopping from rooftop to rooftop. There's 9-1, the graffiti-bombing kunoichi who hides her bourgeois background. And last and probably least, there's Kibo, the fastest sword drawer in all of Brooklyn, and he just uses it to deliver fast food. So Gratnin started as an episodic Infinite Scroll webcomic. We've remixed it into a box set designed by the team that brought you Lab Number 2. Exploring the world of Gratnin with a subway map, trading cards, and 400 feet of accordion ninja comics. Gratnin is a project that's very close to me. It's been a playground for me to work in for about 20 years now, and this most recent incarnation really embodies the idea. It's a send up to all of the great ninja comics I've read. I'm just presenting this full-formed Gratnin experience to y'all. I hope you enjoy it. And this is for all the heads that was with me from day one, you know, reading these Gratnin comics. So like, this is for y'all.
I've been punk most of my life. Strangely, it all started in the desert. I wanted to write a book about the first year I found punk, but it ended up being about so many other things. I had dreams like any other kid. Meet a girl, be a rock star, but there were a lot of roadblocks. Between the white racists and the black gangbangers, my options felt impossible. Until I met Ty. He introduced me to punk rock and changed my life forever.
Is there anybody there? Was you out on Saturday night? And what do you know? I know I'm around. Guitar say sound like nothing at all. When you're playing around and moving behind. Oh, are you think my second TV show? You lock say go. You can cut 'em down.
Right? See, before every good show, you need some solid trailers to just open up with. But with that, Ronald Wimberly, James Spooner. Oh, it's a good time. It's an adventure every second. Welcome, y'all. Welcome, welcome. So, I wanted to open up with a broad focus. It's a big question. So, James, you've been doing a lot of work for a long time. I'm a big fan of yours, from your documentary Afropunk to the organization of the Afropunk Festival, all the way to this point, and the book is fantastic. I love that. And Ronald, you've been working all the way back from Prince of Cats, tons of different properties that you've worked on, Lab Magazine, Sentences, everything. Seeing both of you do the things you do and continue to explore and experiment and try new things continually, I'm genuinely curious, why not get comfortable? Why continue to, you seem to push yourself in that way rather than focusing too heavily on the amazing work that you've done?
All right, yeah, this works. Yo, thanks for having us, first of all, bringing us out here. I'm glad to be back in the museum, physically. I don't have like a long answer for that. I just think it's part of, artistic practices, just like continuously asking questions. And maybe if that wasn't part of what I was doing, I probably could, make a better living doing something else. You know what I mean? Maybe not now, but like to start, yeah.
I'm just somebody that very early on, like in my early 20s, just realized that I was not married to a medium. I think, like when I got out of high school, I was like dead set on becoming a fine artist. Like I was like into sculpture, and my days were like just, I wake up, at noon and just like make these sculptures until like, I don't know, 11 o'clock when I was gonna go party. And I was a DJ and whatever, and like, it just wasn't practical, like I realized, like there's all these gatekeepers and there's just all of these barriers that are getting me, or I have a show and like didn't mean anything or do anything. And then when I had this internal identity crisis kind of thing, when I started thinking about making a documentary, and it was with like this punk energy, because I hadn't gone to film school or anything. I was just like, I want to make a movie, and it was just as simple as that. Like, it's like listening to the Ramones and being like, I want to be in a band, right? So I was like, well, I've seen movies. How hard can it be to make a movie, And so I just kind of jumped in like that, And when comics came around, it was, I'm always saying, like, I've been in comics for 5 months because my book came out in May, And previous that, I was not into, like, I only found out about comics like 6 years ago, So I read some, like I got turned on to some memoir comics, and I was like, oh, it's not just superheroes. I could do this, So I read like Blankets and books along those lines, and I was like, oh, yeah, this makes sense. I could do this. So I wanted to tell a story, and it was like, I can make a movie, but I can just put it in by myself. I don't need to, there's no gatekeepers around. I can just make this thing,
It's fantastic.
I have a question real quick.
Sure.
Did you ever read Slow Jams? Okay, I gotta get you that.
Okay.
One thing that I found really interesting in comparing like that initial work with Afropunk to High Desert was the degree of intimacy to the story, especially that transition in medium. At any point, did you consider telling that story? Especially because I feel like Afropunk is doing a lot of things in terms of sharing other people's stories. You're molding a message out of these collection of narratives. And when it came to your story, I found it interesting that you kind of transitioned into a medium that is a bit more intimate. Were there any kind of initial thoughts about this in terms of a film or any other kind of medium or?
I'm not. What's the question exactly?
Oh, I was wondering that since you had already kind of worked in film and you've engaged in that realm, if this idea for the story came out of your desire to engage with comics and the medium of memoir, or was the desire to tell the story out first, and then you had to figure out the medium in which you would tell it?
Got it. Yeah. So when I first started dating my partner, like 8 years ago, it was just like, any kind of first dates, you just start like telling your stories and, So my girlfriend was hearing these, like how I got into punk and all this stuff, and she was like, oh, that would make a great graphic novel. And that's where it was like, oh, wait, like Batman? Like, what are you talking about, And then she like introduced me to these books, and when I read, something like Stitches or Fun Home or something, I was like, oh, this is just like a movie, but it's on paper. Like, yeah, I could do that, like that's really exciting, the idea that, because I got out of film because I was just tired of like the hustle and the gatekeepers and like trying to get the money together and all this. And I was like, oh, I could do this all by myself, And I had like an iPad already because I'm a tattooer, and at some point, like every tattooer just switched over to iPads for drawing, like stencils and stuff. So I just was already familiar, and I already had Procreate, so it was just like, oh, I just got to figure out how to make these cells, before they had the snapping tool. So it's just like, little things that I had to figure out. But the structure, like, I already knew how to write a script, so I was already like ready for that. I was already understood, pacing and what do you call it? Like, I was basically like storyboarding, So I think that's why my book is like almost 400 pages, because it's just like, I was like, oh shit, I could write a script and it doesn't have to be 90 pages. It could just be what it is, So I just went to town,
This is a quick, just curiosity. Still tattooing?
Yeah, I tattoo like a couple days a week.
Okay. Is it just, are you with a shop?
Yeah, I have a private studio, so it's just kind of do what I want when I want.
Something I'll keep in mind.
Yeah, if you're in LA,
I have a question. Maybe it's obvious, like it's an obvious statement. So you would say, like your art practice, like what you say, ethos is definitely, it's DIY, right? Because like what you're saying is everything that you approach, you just kind of go in first and figure it out as you go along.
Yeah.
Like, so it's a different than, I think a lot of, some people wait for permission, Mm-hmm. And it seems like maybe part of even your story kind of brought that or instilled that in you, would you say? Because, I mean, the two, I guess, or three art practices, like, I mean, even with tattooing, like, how did that start? Did you,
Yeah, I mean, everything is learning on the job, and like, I think with tattooing is a great, I'm not telling anybody here to start tattooing, but it's a great practice in the way that like everybody sucks when they start, but you're
at least when they start.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm just saying, like it's a tool. Like the tattoo machine is a tool, unlike any other. It's not like a paintbrush or a pencil or whatever, right? Like even if you're fantastic draftsman, yeah, like doing illustrations or whatever, it's like great. You're halfway there, But the other half is you have to learn how to use this tool, right? And it's difficult. So the practice of, let's say you're already, like, you're a great illustrator, and then you go use this tool and you make a shitty tattoo. You know, it's like, oh God, like, maybe I'm not cut out for this, right? But everybody sucks. Everybody's first tattoo is hella shaky and the line weight's rough or whatever, and you have to, like, just keep learning on the job. And the people who really love tattooing, like, you know, who are 20 years in and still find passion in it, is because they're always finding new stuff, right? New techniques and what. So it's something that you can make a living at doing every single day. So that practice of, like, sucking and then having and then learning on the job is something that you can then take to anything, right? And I guess I had that from, like, being in a band or having a record label or all the things that I did as a kid. So by the time I'm, like, in my 40s and I'm gonna make a comic, I'm like, well, yeah, I know I'm gonna make mistakes along the way. And I'm gonna waste entire months doing something that I could have automated or whatever, you know, like I could have figured something else out. But I went into it knowing that, so okay, here's an example. I won't take up all the time, but I knew that my shading was gonna get better, you know, like from day one I knew it was gonna take me like 2 years to shade this book. So it was like, I know that I'm gonna get better, I'm gonna get faster, I'm gonna get smoother. It's like things are gonna change. So it doesn't make sense for me to start in page 1 and then go chronologically and get to the end, and then the end of the book looks way better than the front of the book, you know?
But that's okay.
It's okay, but it's not what I wanted. I wanted some consistency, you know?
Okay.
So I did one cell on page 1, then I did one cell on page 2, and I just all the way through 365 pages, then right back to the beginning.
Really?
And then just did that so that, like, I knew that this shit would look consistent. Like, you know, like there might be one shitty cell on each page, but you're not gonna notice.
I really love that. I actually love hearing the stories about how comic artists make comics, because it seems like there's the fear of teaching comics is that I'm going to create some type of dogma, and I love the fact everybody approaches those challenges super, super differently. Mm-hmm. But yeah, like I've heard those stories. That's a beautiful method. Everybody should try that once.
My approach is that, and I feel like I've had to condition myself to, and continually condition myself to think this way, which is like, well, the person who I'm doing this for, first and foremost, is like myself. Mm-hmm. And the trick is that I'm selling like the husk of an experience. You know what I mean? Like, so when I think, because I've definitely, and sometimes still feel that way. It's like I want to present this thing, and a lot of times it's not just an internal pressure, but also it's like, well, you're working with a publisher or an editor, and it's like, okay, well, this is supposed to be, maybe for them, the way that they'll experience this is like it's something that you've presented that they're going to sell. But like for me, it's like, well, I mean, even to get through those 400 pages, right? Like it has to stay fun, right? Yeah. And this sounds like it's fun, right? Like it sounds like a fun game for you to play, right?
It is a game. It definitely is a game. You know?
Yeah, and so for me, I'm like, well, all right, it's gonna change. And sometimes I'll pick up a book and I'll look at it and I'll see, like, I mean, and you can probably still see in those cells because you know the process, like you remember it. But I can be like, oh, wow, okay, so this is what you were thinking when you started. With Gratinin, it's like that. With Gratinin, I was in Angoulême, and I think I was in Angoulême, and this is, okay, here's an example of making for the end presentation, because it starts out as an infinite comic, infinite scroll, but I was also like, well, when I finish this, I'm gonna wanna make a book, right? So I started out making them as like regular comic book pages, and then I just cut them out and I make it, I reorganize them on the computer to be in the infinite scroll. But like within like a couple weeks, the way I drew that comic changed like 3 or 4 times. So like first it's like, these pages. Then I was drawing each panel separately, and then putting it together on the computer. After that, I started to just like draw literally in the format of the screen. And then by the time I finished, it would be like maybe like a 13 by 19 piece of vellum with like, 4 rows like swipes each. Mm-hmm. And now when I look at the comic, I can see like, okay, the fidelity of this one, or like this was definitely like shrunk down, or like, oh yeah, this is when I was cutting up but it's like, I don't know if anybody else can see it. And that's another thing that's great about comics. I think it's just like tattooing in that sense that like you are shit when you start, even if you're a great illustrator, at least when you start. But the audience is so forgiving. Like people buy comics by illustrators all the time. They're not great cartoonists, right? But like they're still able to make something that people can enjoy. They can build their whole career and be like shit comic book artists. Yeah.
What does that mean to be a comic book artist versus an illustrator?
Well, an illustrator, I've done both, right? Like and a cartoonist. Okay, so I'm gonna come clean on something right now.
There we go.
I did a job for Ardbeg where I was, they were gonna hire me to be a cartoonist. I ended up like creative directing this little magazine that they put out. And the problem with talking to the client was they didn't differentiate either, right? But I'm telling, like, a cartoonist writes and draws often at the same time, right? A comic book artist gets a script, and they know how to, they know the medium, right? They know how to tell a story, or they know how to make comics, right? An illustrator, all three, are illustrators, right? But an illustrator doesn't necessarily know the medium of comics,
And by that you mean storytelling, pacing.
Storytelling,
choosing the right.
Yeah, but there's many different types of comics, right? Like there could be single image comics, right? So you could be an illustrator and not know how to make a single image comic. That's just not your job, right? Like maybe you, it's a long tradition, right? Like maybe you illustrate clothes, maybe you fashion illustrator. Fashion illustrator doesn't necessarily know how to make a comic, even a single image comic. Right? Okay. So that's how I would differentiate. So if a client is like, well, we're hiring 3 cartoonists to tell their stories and they get a comic book artist, then like maybe they don't know how to write, or maybe they don't, it's the difference in Wikipedia, which was, I was gonna come clean, which I changed so that so that people, when they so that they know, right? There's a Scottish cartoonist who put it really well. I didn't put this one in Wiki. I changed like the first portion, but he said it's a difference between a comedian and like a comic actor. Like a comedian like writes their own material, like So anyway, look it up on Wiki. It says,
Well, and that's actually one of the really impressive things. Like when I think about the transition from all the things you've done and then being like, oh, I'm gonna make comics. And also like even you telling the story about, I was like, oh, it was a thought and then I did it and now it's done. That transition seems super smooth, especially the way that your book reads. I mean, it's an interesting read because there is this kind of banality, this kind of like day-to-day. It felt very much, I related to it because it felt like life. It didn't feel heightened. Actually, I saw the suburbia reference that you had in there. Mm-hmm. Suburbia felt super heightened. Like I didn't feel like that was an actual person I knew, but a cartoon character. of the scene where you had all these characters occupy a space and they kind of checked a bunch of lists off of like this kind of punk rock quota. But even in the way that you captured these imagined fights, these imagined moments, was the fantasy of engaging with punk rock and punk rock subculture. But you were able to communicate really clearly not only like an idea of a lifestyle and a person, but like the feeling of that existence. And I was really interested that you were able to communicate that on your first book. And it's like, oh, I just wanted to make a comic, so I did, and it's amazing. I'm like, oh, so that's cool too.
Well, I appreciate that, but I think that it comes from, again, it's like, I can't tell you, we've all had this experience where, you know, you buy a book because it like looks good, right? You really, I think a lot of people are attracted to the art, right? So you look at the art and you're like, I like this art, so I'm gonna buy this book, right? Secondary, oh, I like this art and I like, you know, whatever the story is, or whatever I'm being told the story is, right? Then you actually go home and read it and you're like, okay, that was like a half hour I'll never get back, you know? And it's like, it looks great, but I feel like, and I feel bad because again, it's like 6 months in the game when we're here critiquing, but like, I feel like we forget that we're storytellers first, you know? So I approach this like a movie, you know, and had like a pretty solid script. Like it definitely evolved, and that's the beauty of comics. For me, was like infinite retakes, you know? Like, I remember this one, there's this one scene in my book where a girl, it's just kind of like a background moment where this girl is passed out on a bed. And I drew it. She's a troubled girl and she's like slut-shamed and, you know, whatever. And I drew it from like, almost from this like upskirt angle. And my partner was reading it and she was like, I don't think you should portray it this way, you know? And I'm like, well, this is what people think of her. And I'm like, yeah, but she was like, yeah, but you're the artist, you're the director, right? They're looking at this world through your eyes. So
She should edit comics.
Yo, I mean, she's badass. She's badass. So she's like, so you making an upskirt is telling the audience what you think of this girl, you know? And I'm like, oh, well, that's not how I feel. So luckily,
Bro, people get paid for less. That is good work.
it was good work,
That's
right?
good work.
So I was just like, retake, you know? Like, but if it was a movie, I'd have to call in all the actors and I'll do all this, you know? So, and I remember in my second film, like, just like wishing for certain moments, like, oh, I wish I could do this again, you know? So, you know, just being able to say like, or like all the black boxes, like, so there's narration throughout the entire book. When I went into it, I was like, I feel like narration is lazy. I don't want to do it. I want to like challenge myself to tell a story without explaining a lot of things, right? So I wrote the whole script, I drew the whole thing, and then, again, my partner was just like, this reads like a teen drama. You have to insert the adult voice here, you know? So then I went back and I felt like I still stand by the way that it happened. Like, if I feel like when I go to do a comic again, I'll probably try to write it without narration so that I can again, another complaint that I have about a lot of comics is they're telling me all this stuff and I'm not seeing it in the drawing. It's just like a head saying like this, and then there's like all this exposition. So in doing the actual drawing and telling the story, like, could I take all the words out and you still understand what's happening? That feels like success to me, right? So then when I put all the words back in, and then I add a layer of narration, it's like I'm telling the important parts. I'm not telling you what to think or, doing the exposition of the story.
It's like Monk could just be the piano, but it could also be like a quartet. You know what I mean? Other people could play the composition. You could fill out, and maybe
but
you lose some of that.
You need
but
a tight skeleton.
Right. So I have a question for you. If you were to say, if you write a script for this and you shoot it, you would remove narration? Would you just make it a teen? Because I think as a film, it would be great. It's almost like and the content kind of dictates the age, right? So like if you have, it's similar to the note about the upskirt shot, right? Like when you see kids, like that's not for, it's not for the age group that are in the film. Sure. You know what I mean? Like the subject matter is adult, right?
Yeah, like a Euphoria type thing.
Right.
That's a good question. So if I was going to turn this into a TV show or a movie, would I keep the narration? And I think that I would. I think my first inclination is to say yes. There'd probably be less of it, but we grew up with these kind of like Stand By Me and Wonder Years, where you hear that adult voice and it reminds us that this is like something that happened in the past, that the person, no matter how much we fear for them, like they're telling the story, so they made it,
I see.
And I think that, I could imagine if it was like a production from, I don't know, like the CW or something, they might be like, yeah, teen drama, but if it was a production from, Hulu or A24 or something like that, they want to make it more of a grown experience.
Get like Euphoria kind of energy.
I mean, it
So
doesn't have to be that deep.
But if I was show running, right, or like if I was, maybe we were producing it, right? Yeah. This is how I would do it.
We're working out a deal right now.
Right.
No, this is fantastic. I'm enjoying
There's
this.
a show, is it Pen 15 or whatever, where like the kids, I've actually never really watched the show, but I think the idea of the older performers is great. I don't know if I would have you always, but I think every once in a while, just like in a surreal type of way, like something would happen and one of the performers would be you, right? Like you would be like, we cut to a shot and it would be you, like in that space, like as your adult self. And then like in the next shot, it would be the kid again.
Well, I mean, I
do
think
something weird like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is because, so I was faced with this question a little bit because I had 2 meetings back to back with some Hollywood people, right? One of them was like, we want to make this into a movie, right? And another one was, we want to do a TV show, And in both cases, like I'm not saying that either of them are happening.
So don't ask.
No. I mean, it'd be amazing, but like, no contracts have been signed, no money's being. No, it's just Hollywood does a lot of talking. But I did have that question, right? And there's again, my partner, she's like way smarter than me, and she's like, well, if it's a TV show, like with multiple seasons, it has to move beyond the book, right? And is there morally, because it's a memoir, these are people, can I just start making shit up about them, right. Like season 6, we're dealing with what's going on in Sin's home, and it's like, I don't know what the fuck happened at Sin's home. I only saw her at school, or the few times we went. So,
okay.
Morally, can you just
season
make that shit up?
Season 1 is the desert.
Yeah.
Season 2 is New York.
Well, but see, and that's the next question is Is this even interesting? I don't know. Sorry. I'm sorry. So the book takes place in the high desert. So the desert is a character, you know? There are whole pages just dedicated to like nothing, you know, just the desert, right? What happens when, you know, so spoiler alert, I moved to New York. I live in New York. I lived in New York all my 20s, or teens and 20s. Is it like Atlanta, where they're like, we're still calling it Atlanta, but we're in Paris now?
You know,
or does the desert just...
You just gave your, like, that's the pitch.
You
Right?
just stay in
It's
the
like Atlanta.
Well, like, thankfully, but it's...
Actually, this brings me to a really like interesting spot, and this is something that I see reflected in both of your works, and
Yes,
a
bring it
bunch
back
of
to him.
different pieces. Like, I'm genuinely curious is as far as your relationship with where you live in relationship to what you're working on, how that affects it, and possibly if, you know, your work might guide you to different places, especially because I know you bounce back and forth between California and New York. But I know both of you have your work is very reflective of your
I
environment.
mean, we can skip this question because I think the work answers the question, right? In both cases, right?
What was the question?
The question is, does the space you exist in drive your work, and possibly has your work driven you to different spaces?
That's another question.
Because I know that traveling is a part of what both of you do, and it could either affect your practice or maybe your practices guides you to those spaces. I'm just kind of curious that relationship, because it seems like place is really important in both of your bodies of work.
You know, you talk first.
So yeah, the first part of the question is answered by the work. The second part of the question, not so much, which is like, does the work drive me to different places, which I'm here right now, you know, and so yes, right? And certainly there must be a feedback loop, and I think if there's a feedback loop, like Gratnan is probably part of it, you know what I mean? Like, well, my first, you know, like, yeah, the work didn't, yeah, I mean, I was going different places, and that's definitely in the comic. And then the comic takes me different places, and then those things end up in comics, you know? So it is, it maybe speaks to what I think is like a truism, which is just like whatever you do in life, like it ends up in the work, you know? I think if you're, this is gonna sound dogmatic, but I'm gonna say it anyway. I think if you're doing the work, then that's what happens. You know what I mean? Like, even if you're doing some sort of a silly high fantasy, like there should be something that your life and like how you move through the world, like how, you know, is informing that, you know, I think.
Was it really necessary to say silly high fantasy?
That was a dart. Yeah. I mean, I didn't say all high fantasy is silly, but I was saying, like, if you happen to be doing a silly high fantasy, you know.
But I think what I'm hearing is that story should be first. And, you know, if you have a, you know, like if we're talking about, I don't know, like Game of Thrones or something, right? Like that is all made up, but those are like human stories. That's why we like connect. That's why we like hate that character and love that character, because we can relate to them on a human level, even if they're not even, I mean, I guess they're all humans, but, you know, that's what I think you're getting
Yeah,
at,
but
right?
I think also, like, maybe not even on purpose, but I think even subconsciously, sometimes they're putting things in there that are like really speaking to the world that we're moving through, like right now, you know, like, and yes, certainly, in, you know, they're archetypes, they're like human stories, they're things that people do, but I think if an artist is really doing the work, like it starts to reflect like real things that are happening probably in their world or in their life at that moment, even if it's like a funhouse mirror version, you know what I mean? Or like
sure.
something that you have to kind of like think about. But I do think the work, like I think if you're not careful, or I think sometimes the market will strip away that, you know, and it's like processed cheese versus like, I don't know, some really dope, you know, cheese was like these little organisms were like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, oh shit, that was like the stuff that was some sort of microorganism that was in that farmhouse that came down, or in the cave, and it came down and made this funky, crazy cheese, versus like, you know, versus like craft singles, you know what I mean? Like, you know,
Yeah.
Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Bringing up the story and the storytelling first, right? What intrigues me about that is you initially had said you wanted to tell this story, make a great graphic novel. You told the graphic novel, you told the story. But as you were writing the story, you came up with these new rules and disciplines for yourself. Like, I want to have text here. I don't want to have text here. And this is something that I find interesting because there is this question about, you know, how much the medium guides future storytelling and the stories that you might want to tell. Because I'm kind of curious. You're like you already have, before you have a story, maybe you have a story, I don't know. But you're like, in my next story, these are the tools that I want to use and how I want to use them. And I'm kind of curious about how that might guide your future storytelling. And with you, Ronald, I'm curious how that has guided you in possible past stories. Because it seems like you put up new challenges for yourself in terms of storytelling and how you're going to approach those methods. So y'all talk amongst yourselves.
Well, I think that this book is self-contained, but it does end in a space that leaves where I've been told, like, when's part 2 coming out, you know? Which of course is like, well, even if I start tomorrow, like, you know. But so if there was a part 2, then I feel like I would need to follow the same rules. But if I did, like, right now I'm working on a book that's hybrid prose illustration comics. And that has a whole other different set of rules. And when I went to, and it's interesting with that because, like, you know, you guys could probably tell me, but I've like dug looking for like an example, like a comp of what I'm trying to do. And the only thing aesthetically that I found was Diary of a Teenage Girl. But because I don't have any examples, then I gotta like invent the rules, you know? So I found myself writing this prose, and then I did like 6 pages of comics, and then went back into the prose, and again, my girlfriend read the chapter, and she was like, this comic doesn't even matter, you know? Like, you just went, like, I don't want to get into all the details, but it was just basically like, this isn't working, you know? Like, you just threw in a comic just to do it, you know? So I had to really analyze, okay, why do I want to put comics in this prose? Is it just because...
All right, so real quick, I'm going to cut in. Mm-hmm. So that's where I start, is with, so instead of story, question. Like, my sort of guiding thing is like a question at the very beginning of the project, which is like, really, why?
Yeah.
Or what?
Well, why am I not just writing prose? You know, maybe there's not a lot of examples because this shit doesn't work. You know, like, why am I doing this? You know, and you know, part of it is like, I'm asking, is this just marketing? Do I just not want to lose my audience? Like, what, you know, whatever, right? So, where I landed was spot illustrations that go, you know, let's say a chapter covers like 1 or 2 stories, right? Or like one or two moments that tell an overall story. So it's like spot illustrations that kind of amplify the story. And then when there's actual comic breakouts, that's like a sidebar story that is like, you know, almost like, and incidentally, you know, and here's like a funny moment that makes sense with the chapter, but isn't like all of a sudden, you know, it's like a musical, you know, we're not just like breaking into song, you know? So, and I found that seems to be working, you know?
Yo, it's funny you say musical, right? Because like, okay, I think about, I know this is gonna sound like maybe milquetoast or something, but like Cabaret, right? Like one of the ill things about it is like, it's a musical, but it's also like it's got the musical elements that break out from the narrative, but also like the setup. And if you know, every time I've gone to see it, it's usually in a space that is like a cabaret, right? So there's something happening there where it's like, okay, the story will break out into, there'll be, the set will change and it'll be like, okay, now I'm in the village or I'm at the shop or whatever. But also, that we're just gonna do a fucking number, right? Like from the Weimar era, we're gonna have the number play out like right here. And it's also, you're watching through that, you're watching sort of how things change towards like the end of the Weimar, right? Is that what you're doing? Like both the
Well, I feel like I've never thought of this before, but musicals are an interesting hybrid, right? And there is a suspension of disbelief, because obviously in real life, we don't just like, oh, you know, like, I mean, if I could sing, maybe I would, but, you know, versus an opera that is just singing.
What if you just started singing that part, right? That would have been so good.
So, you know, like, you have something like Jesus Christ Superstar, like, that opens with song and it never stops singing, you know? Jesus is dying, he's like, ah, you know, like nonstop, right? So right from the beginning, we start to understand, okay, this is what this is. Okay, I'm with you, right? Musicals, usually they give us a number pretty early on, so we know, okay, this is what this is. Oh, now they're talking. Okay, this is a musical, right? Whereas like when I saw Showgirls, the movie, it was like 20 minutes before a song came. I was like, wait, this is a musical? You know? Like they fucked it up. They didn't set the stage, right?
But maybe, right? I think you could do that with intent, right? Like just to be like, holy shit. All right.
Sure, if you're trying to be like, you know, but this like, you know, like, was Beyonce in that? I mean, they're not trying to be. They're not trying to be artistic.
Right.
So I'm all about like that. You know, it's like Atlanta. You know, all of a sudden we're just gonna be talking about some shit that isn't even, these people aren't even characters we followed, you know? That's great. That's not what they were trying to do. They just fucked up. So in the so bringing it back to comics or to the book, it's like, you know, like we all know what prose looks like. You open the book, you're like, all right, I'm in for a read. You know, we know what comics, okay, I'm this is my language. But when it's trying to do a hybrid, there's infinite ways probably that you could do it, and a lot of those ways could probably be wrong. You know, could probably be like the language, it's not translating. Do you know what I'm saying? So
it's not what's the word? Synthesizing.
Yes. So again, I mean, this goes back to the earliest thing. Like, what's exciting to me about new mediums is learning on the job. You know, so it's like, you know, I go back to when I got a bass guitar when I was 13, and I just got the bass because my friend had the 6-string one, and I was like, well, I guess I got to get the 4-string one. You know, I didn't know what it did. I couldn't, you know, like if you're not. Most people listen to music and are not hearing the bass, are not able to pull it out, right? Yeah. So I had to just like learn, why is this instrument even valuable? You know? And that's exciting. That's an exciting process.
I'm enthralled, but I want to make sure that we have time for questions.
Yeah.
No,
fucking
this
talk.
is fantastic. I mean, we're going to keep talking about this. I'm sorry y'all can't be there for that. But I wanted to just open up the floor for any questions. Do we have any questions?
Hannah White.
Over there.
Our first contestant. Let's see. Ooh, yes, we're working.
Sitting back and listening to you guys talk, it seems like you're almost the inverse of each other. Like James takes in the world and creates like a personal narrative out of it, and Ron takes like his personal experience and creates worlds out of it. If you guys had to switch places, what would you do? Like if you had to create a world and then you had to tell a personal narrative, like what would that look like?
First of all, I disagree with you absolutely. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm doing the same thing. You know, it's just I haven't named a character myself, or like maybe I'm stretched out over several different characters. You know.
Sure. Well, listen, I think that when the difference is fiction and nonfiction, and when you're doing fiction, it's all of the characters are you. You know, like different aspects, people you know, but there's no like, oh, I have to make this person like this, right? Whereas in nonfiction, you're at least supposed to be staying true to.
But see, that's the great thing about, I think, nonfiction, and maybe why it's so tricky, because it's a lie. You know, they're both doing a similar thing.
It is,
right?
and I'm still making choices, right? So it's like, in my book, there are two Nazi skins who are featured, right? And one of them is just a villain that you hate and you never like him. The other one, I really made the choice. I was like, I want to make you care about this person. I want to make you feel like, shit, man, do I like this Nazi? You know, like, you know, because. Like I want to be human, and that's a choice. Like I, you know, and like coming clean right now, like in real life, that was actually one person, but I was like, I want you to like this person, but I also want you to hate this person, because that's how I felt about that person. You know.
See, but that's the art. Is that it was two people, right?
What's that?
That's the art. That's the art. Like you're doing the work. That's, you know. That's the beauty of it. Like that's how it exists in that. That's the truth that you're telling.
In my
with the
head,
lie, you're lying to tell the truth.
Yeah. Because in my head, it is two people. You know, it's this. I have empathy for this sad boy who's raised in a racist home. You know, and the like how crazy it is to be like, oh, my best friend from kindergarten is black, but also fuck niggers. You know,
it's interesting because in Autobio, I know a lot of people make amalgamation characters. They combined a lot of people into one person. It's interesting that you had to break apart a person to create the dynamic.
Both of those things are happening. You know, but those are choices. That is world building. You know, but like when I was watching your trailer, and I'm thinking about like ninjas in the hood. You know, it's like, oh, that's fun. You know, but again, you have to make them like, they got to be real people. Like, you know, it's like they're just, you know, they got swords. Right. We got swords.
We got another
I don't have life
question.
rights.
We can start talking, and I'll get to you.
I wondered about your all's relationship with mainstream. Because the talk, I mean, talk about whatever we want to talk about, but it was called The Craft of Rebellion. And I think about punk as you know, especially in the early days, as embracing a rebellion. But then, you know, you sit down with the Hollywood guys to you know, talk script, and I wonder, where do you feel like you sit with rebellion on the one side, on the fringes, versus the mainstream, Marvel or DC or, you know?
Well, I think all of our favorite records, punk records, like, yeah, they were sitting in a room with like, you know, record producers and such, studio cats.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah. Well, if you have the record, right? I guess you could put it out DIY. Yeah.
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 100. You
Yeah.
tell yours. I'm going to contradict you.
Yeah. Well, maybe not all of your favorites, but like some of the ones that you can actually find on wax still, like you maybe have a better record collection than I do. I imagine you do. But yeah, I started out making my comics, at Pratt, taking them around to Jim Handley's, what's the other one from the UK? Forbidden Planet. All the different, like we would just run a box of the comics out there, zine stuff, like Cass was doing all of that. And then at a certain point, you're like, well, shoot, Like, let me, at least for me, I started out pretty early. I was like, oh, let me go to comic book conventions and see if I can get some work. I did stuff, like I worked as an illustrator. I've worked as an illustrator and a designer my whole life. And comics, I have worked for Marvel. I have worked for DC. And it's been, I don't think it had to be, but it was definitely, I think, antagonistic, because at the end of the day, you're just, the editors are brand managers, like you're a fan artist, right? Like there are no, like people say they're doing original work. I'm sorry, I'm gonna shit on people's things that they like, but like, you're creating a product. You're creating that like craft cheese, but like, craft cheese is maybe great. And the best grilled cheese is a government cheese, grilled cheese. Okay. But like, I don't know, it has been antagonistic. I think the people who work in there, they have to do a lot of work to kind of not get ground into like, like hamburger meat. You know what I mean? Like creative wise. And I don't know if it has to be that way, but like, I mean, if you push me to the wall, I'd say, form follows function. And the function is to just continue to sell these, zombies, and it eats up artists. I mean, I think you see the same thing happen with, any of the like sort of arts, like animation, music. It's like at a certain point, it's like you're talking about how you're going to keep going. At what point, if you're producing anything, right, does it become like you're just kind of you're producing a product, right? Like it's not a practice.
Well, I have a lot to say when it comes to, the mainstream and punk and all this stuff. And just to give like a very short, truncated version of my experience with Afropunk. So I made this DIY film. I screened it 300 times in 3 years by myself. And it was just a DIY venture through and through. Part of that screening process was creating my own audience with the festival. That festival went from being again a very DIY punk rock experience to it growing and corporate interest being like, yo, we'll give you some money, help you, make it bigger, better, whatever. And compromises started to happen. And those compromises became too much for me, and I bounced. And when I bounced, Afropunk kept my partner, who was a businessman first, turned that from Afropunk, this DIY, it could have been a scene, into a brand. And today, it's the festival is in 4 cities. It's been in 7 countries. There's, they boast 80,000, 100,000 people go to this festival. At each one, the Roots headline, Jill Scott, like all this shit that's like, and that's not news or exciting, but there's a whole generation of kids who hear the word Afropunk, think that as black punks is for them. They go to it and they're disappointed, so then they go and they start their own thing. And that's where the magic is, right? So I've watched this process. You know, I've gone through the whole mourning period and come to the other side where there's a whole generation of kids who are doing POC punk shows on purpose all over the country as a fuck you to the thing that I started, you know? And that's the whole cycle, you know? The underground could not exist without the mainstream because all we're doing is saying fuck you. And the mainstream couldn't exist without us because they're just white bread. They don't have any flavor, you know? And it's just, but when it comes to comics, or at least this one book that I made, it's with Harper, you know? It's like it couldn't be more mainstream. So don't get it twisted. This is not a punk book, you know? It's a book about punk. You know, it's a book about a punk experience, but it's through HarperCollins, you know? Like I didn't have to compromise at all. Every single thing I asked for, they did. I wanted some gold leaf on the side, they did it. I wanted like a secret poster on the inside, they did it, you know? And I want to sell my own books, and I do it, you know? So they get it into Barnes & Noble, I can't do that. And then I can be here, or I can be, I've done, I think 50 dates or 40 dates at like, you know, whether it's at bookstores or DIY spaces or conventions, selling my own books, you know? So I feel like it's, that question of rebellion is like, well, what am I just rebelling to rebel? Or am I rebelling against ethical compromises, you know? And when this company is like, we'll give you, you know, we'll let you do whatever you want, then it doesn't feel the same as when somebody's saying like, oh, well, you need to put this hip hop group on this punk show because we need to broaden the audience, you know?
Hannah, do we have any time for any more questions, or?
I have one real quick question. So when is the punk book coming out?
Well, I mean, the thing is like, this is my first jump into comics, but I was making zines when I was 16 and did that all the way through like until I don't know, I mean, for years. So, I don't know, I mean, I think, you know, I'm gonna use the old man excuse. It's like, you know, I got a family, I got a mortgage, you know, and again, it's that thing where like you know what you're getting into. So when I'm sitting here talking to these Hollywood executives, if there was I go in with the expectation that they're gonna, and these are a lot of ifs, because nobody gets their shit actually made. Like, we have some examples, but that's like 1,000,000 to 1, you know? But like, you know, just as a mental exercise, if the High Desert became a show, like there are definitely gonna be things about it that I don't like. I just gotta walk in knowing that, you know? But what I think is, we can all point to a show, whether it's like The Walking Dead or you know, Woke or whatever, right? All these shows that came out of comics, and do you know how many more fucking comics they sold after those things came out? You know, because people want to know the original source, and that can never be changed, you know? So my feeling is the TV show is an advertisement for the real deal, you know?
All right.
Yeah, we're at 11:38 or probably 11:40 at this time.
All right, so we're running a little bit behind, but do you know what? I think it was a pretty goddamn good time.
Thank you.
I want to thank James Spooner and Ronald Wimberly for coming out, and thank you all for coming out to check out this talk with us. Hopefully, I'll go out and enjoy the rest of the show. Take care.